Well, good evening and welcome back to the Journey Home program. I'm your host, John Mark Grodi, here on EWTN. And once again, we have this great opportunity to come together to hear a story of faith and conversion. We're joined tonight by Brenda Caster. She's a former Seventh-day Adventist, and her written story can be found at chnetwork.org/story, so check that out. But Brenda, I forgot to ask beforehand, when did you actually enter the church?
Easter Vigil 2015.
2015.
So almost 11 years now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for letting me come.
To share your story. I love this opportunity, right? Because the part of the journey is the journey itself, all the struggle and the turmoil and what comes after. But at some point, God gives us the opportunity to turn around and share it with others to comfort them. And so thanks for doing that here tonight.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for bringing me here.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the beginning, Brenda. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and your family's spiritual background.
Okay. So my dad was raised Catholic, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. His whole family, still Catholic. Most of the town was a really small town. And when he was in his 20s, he started dating a woman in that small town, and she was Seventh-day Adventist. So he fell in love with her. They were going to get married, and he converted to Adventism. And then they broke up. But he continued to feel like that was where he was meant to be, and he ended up going to college in Battle Creek, which used to be Emmanuel Missionary College, and now it's Andrews University. It's the seminary for the Adventist Church, and that's where he met my mother, who also was a convert to Adventism when she was about 13 or 14. In fact, her parents were given Bible studies by my now husband's grandfather.
Wow.
So kind of an interesting
Yeah.
part of that. So they were married 4 months after they met, moved back to New York State. That's where my mother was from. My dad, worked with his father-in-law for a while. I'm the second child of 5. I have 2 sisters, 2 brothers. It was, a very wonderful childhood, really was. My parents, great parents. We were in a really good, strong Adventist community.
Yeah.
Small church out in the country, but we had our own church school. I went all through, 1 through 12 was all Adventist schools. Brought up in the church. It was very active. Back then, it was a lot of social events. We used to go to people's homes all the time for dinner on Sabbath. We had potlucks. Lots of things going on. So it was really a wonderful childhood. Pathfinders, which is kind of like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, but, Adventist way of doing it. And the schools, and that's one thing I need to say is that it prepared me to become Catholic, I feel like, because lots of Bible study. I mean, so much background of the Old Testament especially, but New as well. A lot of the sanctuary doctrine, all about how the sanctuary in the Old Testament applied to the New Covenant and Adventism somehow. But anyways. How
did that, what did worship look like for Seventh-day Adventists?
Yeah, it's pretty much like most Protestant churches. Okay. I have a daughter that's a Baptist, and I've been to her church a few times. It's pretty similar, song service, sermon.
And the seventh day thing, again, for people who aren't familiar with that background, what's the emphasis there for that?
Yeah, well, that's the biggest emphasis of being Seventh-day Adventist. And, in fact, for most people who consider leaving, that's the one sticking point, because there are not that many churches. If you believe in the Seventh-day Sabbath, I know there's Seventh-day Baptists and maybe a few others, but, that's a hard thing to give up. Let's see. So through high school, I went away to a boarding school. I always liked my husband. I was attracted to him. He's 2 years older than me, and but we never dated. But just before my senior year, we started dating, and we got married a year after I graduated high school. And
he a man of faith.
He was yes, he's Adventist too. In fact, I think he's like a 4th generation Seventh-day Adventist.
Wow.
And, I can just say this up front now, he's still Adventist. It's been a hard kind of sometimes. It was more when I left the Adventist church that it was kind of a rocky situation, mostly because I just wanted to keep debating with him, and he doesn't like confrontation. But we got through it.
Everybody's on their journey. Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I was going to ask too. Up to this point, again, you growing up in the Adventist church and in that community, you mentioned lots of social gatherings, lots of fellowship. In terms of your own internal faith at that point, did you really have a sense of a relationship with God, a prayer life? At that
Very
point?
much so.
Okay.
Thank you for saying that.
Sure.
Jesus was always in my heart. I loved being Adventist. I loved learning. That's probably part of what brought me to the Catholic Church is I like to study. I like to learn. And I felt like the Adventist Church gave me all those things, all that information that I wanted to learn about. And yet Jesus was always there with me. I mentioned in my book, when I was 16, my parents were in a really bad car accident out in Michigan. That year in 1975, we went to visit. I wasn't in the car. I rode home with my cousin's family, and all of them were in the hospital, some with worse injuries than others. But leading up to that, I kind of had a little bit of rebellious time. Some of my friends, which are still good friends, and they were good friends, got me into, I did a little shoplifting, did a little marijuana and stuff like that. And I always felt bad. I didn't like it. I was doing it just to be cool, And then when that car accident happened, which was right after that year in high school, that was the end of it,
Yeah.
I was alone in the hospital, back and forth between two hospitals to visit, and it was very lonely, but I'm grateful that it brought me out of that silly time.
Yeah. For Adventists, how do you, as a child, how would you have seen, again, the question of sin, and what do you do with sin? Was there a sense of repentance or confession? How did that work?
Yeah, there was repentance. Obviously, no confession, to a priest or something, but to each other. There were times when I knew that was a hard thing about that year when I was, my parents didn't know anything, that I was their good little girl, away at school, and I was for the most part, but when they found out, it did kind of break my heart, and I told them it's all done. They were fine. They accepted that. So, they were, like I said, they were just great parents. Both my parents were really into music. My dad had a beautiful tenor voice. My mother loved to play the piano, so there was a lot of special musics of him, and he and I sang duets together lots of times, and so it was a very happy childhood, I would have to say. There was rocky parts, but very involved.
One other question I wanted to ask before I got onto it. Again, you mentioned before the program, Seventh-day Adventists, because of the emphasis on the Old Testament and the Old Testament laws and rituals, there are a lot of rules that aren't necessarily typical of other Christian groups. What were some of those? Yeah.
So, of course you had the Sabbath, and then there was a lot of rules about the Sabbath.
Okay.
Certain things, we never watched TV. You didn't listen to anything but Christian, no secular music. I remember we couldn't go swimming, we couldn't ride bikes, things like that. That sort of changed over time. And then with our own family, we still didn't watch TV. In our own marriage, I was the legalist. My husband was always very more open-minded about things. But I was the one that, was pretty strict with what we did on the Sabbath, or even not even the Sabbath so much. But Friday night was a big thing, sunset on Friday night was when the Sabbath started. So you had to have the house all clean, and all the laundry done. You got a food prepared for the next day, and something special for Friday night. It was a lot. And, as my children grew, they helped a lot too. But it was a nice time, and yet, it got to be a burden sometimes, and especially in the winter when the sun goes down at like 4:30. It's a lot to get done.
Right.
But, on the Sabbath, then it was nice to have that rest, from all of that.
Yeah.
I used to go between, should I wash the dishes or not? Should I change the sheets on the bed if my child wet the bed or something? Was that work? I struggled with that a lot. In some ways I still do, not as a Catholic, but what qualifies work, Is it something we do that we make money at? And like I said, is washing the dishes work? Is vacuuming the floor work?
Yeah.
I think that things that are done out of love are no longer work.
Yeah. And I think in the Catholic Church we have maybe perhaps a more rigorous moral ethic that helps us to discern those things.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. You got to bring in the heart element and the intention element. But on the other hand, it's like actually that practice of being so more intentional with the Sabbath day, even planning ahead of time so that you can really make it holy. That's something that we can all learn from, for sure.
It is. And I mentioned that. I learned that, I mean, preparation for anything is a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I like to paint. I did a lot of painting this winter, and, you know, prepping the whatever, you know, if you got to put masking tape around and then when you finally get to it, it turns out so much better when you've prepared, you know. And it's that way even as a Catholic. I try to prepare. It's a little bit hard, you know. My husband's Sabbath, Saturday. If you could call it a Sabbath on Sunday, yes, but it's not really like that for me because I honor him with his Sunday, with his day of worship. As far as, I mean, he goes to church, comes home, and I don't try to force him to do something that I know he wouldn't want to do on the Sabbath, you know. But he still is he doesn't really make a big issue out of things. So.
We make do and we discern and we do the best we can. So you met your husband at boarding school. Right. And obviously your guys' faith was part of what brought you together.
For sure.
So what happened next?
Well, I mean, after we married in the Adventist church, and one thing about marriage, back in that day, you didn't wear wedding rings, so I didn't have a wedding ring for about 30 years.
Interesting. What's the
No jewelry.
Oh,
you know, that's
I
another
see.
thing. No
Okay.
jewelry. You couldn't play cards with real cards. You know, played a lot of rook. So you know, some of those little things. You know, so it seems like it's been so long ago. It's almost 19 years this year since I left the Adventist church. So I've forgotten a lot of that. But so yeah, we married in 1978. Our first daughter was born a year later, and then we've had 10 children altogether. And, you know, we had not boarding school, it's still a boarding school. We had a church school where we sent most of our kids, the Adventist church school, on and off over the years. And then I homeschooled some in between there too. So, you know, we raised our kids in that. It was still a very active, you know, lots of children in the church back when they were growing up. So there was a lot of the same things I had when I was growing up. And it was I feel like a good bringing up of, you know, good morals, good community, all of that. So one of the things I bring up in the book that was a big part of our lives every summer was camp meeting. So it still goes on at the boarding school that Robin and I went to, which is about an hour from our home. People camp, a lot of people camp for the whole week. It's like 2 weekends and a whole week in between, where they would bring speakers in from all over the country, special speakers, you know, night meetings. It would be like 4 or 5 meetings a day, including a cooking school type thing, you know, nutrition, because that's a big thing, you know. I mean, vegetarian, a lot of them are vegetarian.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
A lot are even vegan. I tried being vegan a few times after cooking school, but it didn't last. My kids they'd hide my vegan cookbooks, and, you know, my husband was not going to give up milk. And so, but that was a real, you know, I've always been interested in health and eating. And, you know, even as a child, we ate a lot of our food from scratch. We had gardens. But it was a real burden sometimes. There was one year where the cooking school was all about not eating fruits and vegetables together. So scientifically, there's a lot more fruits that we consider vegetables. So, you know, your vegetables are more the root vegetables or the leaf vegetables. But so I came home from there, I'm like, yeah, we're going to do this. We just got to do this. And they equated it with, because before the fall, it was just fruit. And then after the fall in the Garden of Eden is when they introduced vegetables. I've tried to look into that some. I'm not sure if that's completely valid. But anyways, it sounded reasonable to me. So we tried that. Once again, we didn't stick with it very long. But I've probably always been a little too obsessed with what we're eating. My kids could tell you that, you know. But, you know, we did have a good vegetarian diet. And when they grew up, they all eat meat now, which is, we don't care. But so, and camp meeting was a great time, but there was a lot of really pushing Adventist doctrine. And so, you know, you'd go home, you'd buy all these books. Also, I should bring up Ellen White. Of course, she was a very strong, she didn't call herself a prophetess, but a lot of people have. she was one of the founders of the Adventist Church. And
Right.
so, every year I'd buy more Ellen White books. Every year my birthday was always during camp meetings, so I'd get Ellen White books for my birthday and, go home and read them all and feel more convicted about all the stuff that I should be doing as far as the Sabbath or what we're eating or our lifestyle. And it was a heavy burden sometimes.
Oh, well, two things there. So number one, like one thing that strikes me is that certainly the desire, right, to read Scripture and to figure out what are we to do to obey God is a holy desire. Now, I think as we'll get to, right, some of the issue there is like, well, who decides what's essential or not essential, or what applies or doesn't apply, or how do we think about these things? There's a whole other issue there. And I forgot the other thing I was going to say, so don't worry about that. But that's I wanted to point that out there. That's a good desire, but what sort of begs the question of, well, who's to decide, right? How do we discern these things? How do we understand the heart of them, or what's really the purpose for them? And so it's a good desire, but there's something missing there.
Yeah. And, and I was always the one pushing this. And I'm not saying, because my husband wasn't like, he would never like say, no, we're not going to do that or something. He kind of let me do what I thought we should do for the family. And he mostly supported it. I mean, he was, so, our business, he was starting, he's in a family business and he took it over once we got married and really spent a lot of, he worked 12-hour days for years and years. So a lot of the home stuff was on my shoulders. Not that he wasn't there to support it, but so, a lot of those lifestyle things were all my doing. And
I know what I was going to ask is that with all those things, what was the understanding, again, like you're trying to do all, so that if there's 100 of these things, you're trying to do all the things. What is the purpose of that?
Yes, exactly.
How did you see that?
And I do think that from reading Ellen White, I felt like that's what I had to do to be that good Adventist Christian. That was a really important thing. And I'm not saying it wasn't, but I think I took it too far, made it more of a burden for me and my children, our family, than I should have. And I could probably talk to another Adventist that didn't feel like that, but that was how I took it.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
So anyways, we got married, had all of our children. We were involved with other families in the church a lot. We had the social events, just like I'd said. So it was 2007. Yeah, that was it. So I remember a few days before, we had this family that one of their daughters was living with us, same age as one of our daughters, and they had been homeschooling for years, but she really wanted to go to an Adventist school for her 8th grade year, and there was no Adventist schools near them. So she came and lived with us that year, and we got to be really good friends with their family. They'd often come on Sabbaths to go to church with us, come over for dinner. And a few days before one time that they came, I got this magazine in the mail. It was called Proclamation. And it was a magazine of former Seventh-day Adventists, different people, and they'd put together this magazine. And I don't know how I got it. They must have just randomly picked out names, and I got one. And I can't remember if I showed it to my husband when it first came. I didn't really know anything about it. I hadn't really read it up until the next Sabbath that came. And the husband of that family, we used to have a lot of talks about religion. He was just really open to talk about religion and philosophical ideas about the religion and all of that. And I showed it to him as they were leaving, and I said, "Have you ever seen this before?" He said, "No, I haven't." He turned it over and looked at the back. He said, "Looks like it might be a former Seventh-day Adventist thing." I'm like, "Oh, well, I was going to just throw it away." And it was like mid-afternoon that Sabbath, and they left. And my husband did what he usually does on Sabbath. He took his nap, and it was the spring. It was April 28th. I can still remember the day. And all our kids went outside because it was a pretty nice day. And I just sat inside and started reading it. I'm like, oh my goodness, I should not be reading this. But I just couldn't help it, And I kept, like, the kids would come in the house or something, and I'd put it down, try to pretend I wasn't reading it,
Yeah.
But I just kept reading. I read that whole magazine that afternoon, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And we had a choir at that time, so we were going to choir practice that afternoon and went to the church, and I'm like sitting there, and I'm always like giddy with enthusiasm about all of this. Like, I took it all in, hook, line, and sinker, and I'm like, that's it. But, I kept quiet, didn't say anything to anybody. I think a couple of days later, I showed it to my husband, and he was like, he looked at it, leafed through it a little bit. Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah, these are former Seventh-day Adventists. He didn't tell me not to read it or anything. That was all he said. But, it just snowballed from there.
What do you think, was there something in there, some concept or some realization that impacted you so much at that time?
I'm trying to remember what some of those
or was it just maybe the fact that it was just like seeing a new world, like you'd never thought about this possibility before?
I've heard this term before. It was like I'd been looking at life through Adventist glasses, this is how it is, and then when I read that, it was like, oh, there was another side to the story. There was probably a little bit about Ellen White, and I'd read a lot about her and heard things over the years, how she plagiarized a lot of her stuff. I don't know if that's true or not. Sure. I think people did back in the mid-1800s. And one thing I would just say is, her biggest book, or I shouldn't say biggest, but the most vital one, I would say, in the church, The Great Controversy. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's basically a history kind of, I believe it starts with the fall of Jerusalem, and then up through, in the end of it is all about the second coming and how it's going to happen. But in the middle is a lot of history, and of course the Catholic Church is paramount, the Whore of Babylon and all of that, So, I'd read that at least once. Another book, let me just say, her other book, The Desire of Ages, which is all about the life of Christ, a beautiful book. I mean, I kind of had a somewhat conversion at that point. I remember reading it when I was 17, and it was like, I didn't fall in love with Jesus then, but it was a stronger bond.
Sure.
And so, she wrote good things too, but a lot of stuff that I read, especially about how to eat and how to keep the Sabbath and all of that, was more of a burden. But, so, I think there was something in there about her. And I didn't say, I'm just going to believe that, but I did, it made me start studying, I mean, the internet, looked up stuff online, and it's kind of confirmed a lot of the stuff they were saying. They had a website, so, I started reading that. You could read some past issues online, and I don't even know if Robin knew I was reading all of that stuff, and I don't even remember how long it was until I just told him, I don't think I can be Adventist anymore. And he didn't say too much, he was like, well, so didn't say much. But I continued to go to church every week with him. And I'm trying to think how many kids we still had at that time, young enough to be going to church. I mean, our youngest son was 4. So, and they have Sabbath school, stuff for the kids. And so I wanted him to keep doing that. And so I went, and I always went with the attitude of see what you can get from it,
right.
Not to mention just seeing people, my friends, lots of good people there. But just pretty much every week I would just come home. I just felt like this heavy weight on me. And it wasn't like being drawn back to it, but it's like, I don't know what to do,
right. Something's
Robin's not going to go along with this. So it was about a whole year of going every week with him. And in the meantime, I was also checking out some other Sunday churches. In the course of the 6 years between leaving the Adventist church and becoming Catholic, I think it was 12 different Sunday churches I went to, different denominations. And I found something good in all of them. Right. Especially even the friendliness. Some are, more welcoming to visitors and all of that. I ended up, for the longest time, going to the Alliance Church. And a lot of that was because they had an adult Sunday school. Most churches, the Adventist churches always had Sabbath schools for children and adults. And that was part of the draw for me, even in the Adventist church, even though for many years I couldn't go because I was down in the cradle row with my, young children. Yeah. But I like that discussion. I wouldn't say debate, but I like learning other people's thoughts about things. And so that's what attracted me to the Alliance Church. Really, really good Sunday school teacher who was actually a guidance counselor at the local high school that I got to meet again later. But
Let's take a little break there,
Okay.
Brenda. As you're entering this new phase in your journey in terms of exploring and again this big new world and your experiences with the Alliance Church. We'll come back in a couple minutes and hear the rest of it.
Okay.
All right. We'll be back in just a couple minutes to hear the rest of Brenda's story, so stay tuned for that. I want to remind you, as always, that if you are someone who has questions about the Catholic Church, you're perhaps coming from a Seventh-day Adventist background or another Christian background, we'd love to walk with you and support you on your journey. So check out chnetwork.org. We've got many different stories and articles and videos, but especially a community of people like you, a community of seekers, a community of people who have become Catholic, who'd love to share your story and hear your questions and pray with you and for you as you continue the journey forward. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. See you then. Welcome back to the Journey Home program. We're entering the second half of our hour tonight, speaking with Brenda Caster, a former Seventh-day Adventist. I mentioned before her story, written story, can be found at chnetwork.org/story. But also, you mentioned your book a couple times because a lot of this testimony you put down in this book, Seasons of My Faith by Brenda Caster. People can look that up. They want the book length, detailed description of all this great story that you've been sharing with us tonight, Brenda. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
So, when we left off, someone had sent you this ex-SDA conversions network, this magazine, and you'd read it, and it again, as we noted, it wasn't so much one particular thing, but the fact that you just hadn't really thought of the world outside of this lens before, and so that moved you into a period of time of searching and asking questions. But pick it up there. You were go for it.
Yeah, and one thing I can say in regards to that too is that we never associated with hardly anybody. I mean, I didn't. Obviously, I was a child, and my dad and his work did. But, our world was just Seventh-day Adventist. I mean, I knew there was other people, but I never had an opportunity, even in my teenage years, because I went to a Adventist boarding school. Sure. And, there was not a lot of communication with the public in that, especially in a religious sense. But so I wanted to bring up, too, this was kind of starting to happen back then, I guess in the mid-2000s, of people that I knew leaving the church. There was several good friends that left the church before me, even relatives. There was one, like my best friend. I didn't know her really well. We got to know each other finally at camp meeting and then through alumni weekends because her husband went to the same school that I went to. And we had just started to get to know each other well. And she left the church. And I'm like, oh, and it's like, I guess you can't be my friend anymore, and it was a really hard time for me. And she didn't live nearby, but at least the occasions that we would see each other, I thought, oh, I'm going to really miss that. So it was okay. But when it happened, when I left, like she was the first person I called. And it was her. Then I even had like an aunt and uncle who left right about the same time. The pastor that was at our church, a couple of years before I left the Adventist church, he left. He's actually now come back again. But those friends were so important to me during that time. Yeah. Even though none of them were in my church or even lived near me, but, call me whenever you want. If you need, anytime, day or night, if you need some support. So I was so thankful for those friends that got me through that time. And I do say that for about 2 weeks when I left, I had this, what am I doing? Yeah. Especially because my husband wasn't on board, especially about the Sabbath, but it didn't take too long. I would say within 2 months, I was very sure of what I was doing. One thing I got to say is that, it got me thinking afterwards, how can a church that's only been around since, mid-1800s think that they're the one true church? I mean, I don't know why that never occurred to me before, but this was really a big thing for me to realize that, the Christian church was started 2,000 years ago. And I knew that, but I'd never really applied it to my life.
Sure. What was the general perspective amongst Adventists towards other Christian groups? Were they seen as fellow Christians?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody but Catholics.
Everybody but Catholic. That would be my follow-up question.
You were Christian. You could be Catholic, but that wasn't really Christian. That's kind of what we felt like growing up. The only thing I would say, and I don't know if it's so much now, but there was a lot of emphasis on evangelization, of course. The Adventist Church has their evangelistic series. Back when I was growing up, you get people in, now a lot of it is video and stuff. But, really trying to make people into Adventists. And sometimes, when you get visitors at church, and I'm not saying they were only being friendly to convert them, but there was a lot of that. That was sort of an underlying thing to try to bring people in. And I know it was for their own salvation, and a lot of them were not going anywhere anyways, but it was, if you could bring a convert from some other place, it was always a really strong emphasis on that.
Sure. Well, what happened next? As you get a couple weeks, you were really thinking through this, but eventually, what happened? Well,
eventually going to these other churches, and I was actually pretty happy going to the Alliance Church.
Is that the Christian Missionary Alliance?
Christian Missionary Alliance, sure. Yes. A couple of my daughters came with me. They were in their teens when I left the church. Let's see, they were 15, 13, and 11. And they were, they were still going to the Adventist church because their friends were there. They were going to school there. But they seemed to be okay with me leaving. I will say that my oldest daughter, whose name is Faith, briefly, I'll just say, so when my husband was 33, he got cancer. He came down with testicular cancer, which spread to his lungs. He had surgery, chemo, and he was supposed to be sterile. And lo and behold, we had Faith, so we named her Faith, and then four more. We had 5, and then we had 5 more.
Oh, wonderful.
And she was really, it was a kind of a pivotal time in her life. And when I left, she seemed happy enough, and I think she was, but it had a big effect on her, I think more than any of the other kids. And she still struggles today kind of with that whole change in her life. But anyways, so it was 2013 when my friend, her name is Shelby, the one that left a couple of years before me, I'm trying to remember how it happened. Did she just call me up and say, hey, I'm going to be Catholic? I think she just told me about this website.
Not Catholic.
I was like, oh my goodness, no, you can't. So she called me up and told me she was looking into it, I guess. I think there was she had a friend there who had left the Catholic Church and was coming back, and she introduced her to some woman's website who was an evangelical Christian, and she had joined the Catholic Church. And I remember going to it, and it was just like that day's post or something on her website. Her kids were going to, catechism class or whatever to have First Communion. And it was about modesty was their lesson that day. And she was writing this thing about modesty and how it's not just focused I feel like the same way, modesty was more about women, what we wear. I remember growing up, we weren't supposed to wear a sleeveless clothes or, open-toed shoes, things like that. And they brought out how modesty is so much more than that. Yeah. It's your lifestyle. It's, even pride and things like that.
Attitude of the heart, yeah.
Wow, I've never heard it from that point of view. This is really, really good. So, I read more from her. I don't know how over that time I discovered the Journey Home, and I was just, that was a pivotal thing for me.
More stories, right? Just like back of that magazine, more stories.
I went on YouTube every day, I think just about every day, at least 3 times a week, and watched 1 or 2.
Wow.
From every faith. I think there was Seventh-day Adventists on there. I might have watched 1 or 2, but just everybody, and just hearing, the theology behind it from their background, and just hearing them, the process it took for them, it was encouraging. I was just blown away by all of that. So I'll just back up a little bit too about when I first left the Adventist church, and of course the Sabbath was such a big thing. I felt so free that first Sabbath that I didn't really believe that, it was this strict thing. I was still going to church, but I can remember coming home that afternoon and going to a garage sale up the road, something I never would have thought to do before on a Saturday, And then the next week I went to the Salvation Army because they were having their big half price sale with my daughters. It was just this freedom of I'm not have to stick by these legalistic rules. And I'm sure people would say it's okay. I mean, there were people who wouldn't buy gas on the Sabbath. You can't go buy milk on the Sabbath. There was so much, and I know it was just more a personal thing. People just were like that, but I would hear it and I'd think, oh, I guess I better do that too.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of freedom when I left the Adventist church.
Well, it's interesting because again, it seems significant. You stumbled on that modesty article because it's right. That's an issue where the order of operations of how you think through that issue are really important, right? If you just start with the externals only, it ends up this very legalistic, narrow, constrictive, and you don't know how to apply it. Whereas if you start on the inside out, right, begin, what's the attitude of your heart? And then how does that trickle into how you dress or how you present yourself or how you speak?
Right.
It's an inside out process. And so for a lot of these things, again, there's good in certainly trying to organize our life and prioritize the Sabbath, all these things.
Yeah.
But it has to be this inside out sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. So after I read that, that modesty article, I looked up my local Catholic church, and the town I live in used to have 3. Now it only has 1. Still has the 1. And I went on their website, and they were actually what I did was the next Sunday, I went to a mass. Oh boy, I had no idea what to expect.
Yeah.
But when I walked in there, I felt something.
Mm.
There was something there that I had any church I'd ever been to. And obviously it was the Eucharist, it was Jesus. So I sat there, I did what everybody else was doing, got up, sat down, and I got to say, my church, so we have the most amazing organist and organ. The church is 1854. I can't remember how old the organ is, but it's one of the oldest organs still working in the country.
Wow. And
we have an amazing organist, Jim, if he watches this. And I sing in the choir now too. But it was just beautiful. I mean, I'll remember the glory to God in the highest. I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. And then as we're going into the communion part and the, Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, my heart was just like melting. So I left, I didn't say anything. I know my husband knew where I was going. He didn't ask. I didn't say, and I just kept going back. But so the bulletin that week mentioned a Bible study they were going to have. That I think it was Wednesday at 1:00. So I went and I got there early because I wasn't sure of anything. I'd only been to the sanctuary. They have a whole other part. It used to be a school. It's no longer a school. Yeah. So I walked in and I asked like the secretary or whatever there about the Bible study. Oh, that got canceled. Oh. I said, well, I'm just coming in. I'm checking out the Catholic Church. He said, well, if you want to go into the chapel there's a few women in there. They pray the rosary every week. So you can go in there and talk to them. So I did. And I was like, oh man, they were already done, but they were still there chatting. So I came in and probably spent a half an hour talking about my story and everything. And I kept going every week after that, week after week. It was they encouraged, uplifted me. So this was in November of 2013. And I went and said, I want to take RCIA. And I was told it's too late, for this year. So I had to wait another till September to start it up again. And there was 4 other women with me. There was 5 women doing the class. It was a wonderful time of fellowship. I got to say, being Adventist, which I had a lot of biblical knowledge, and I'm not saying that any glory to me, but I didn't really learn that much. It was more of this fellowship with those other women. We really connected. And I learned some things, differences about, plus I had spent a year and a half now already, or almost a little over a year, reading up online and buying books like crazy, getting books from the library. So I already kind of had it. But anyways, it was still good to be in a group. And so, the following Easter Vigil of 2015, and my husband came, one of my daughters came, my parents came, and a couple of Adventist friends I invited, for the Easter Vigil. And I can still remember there was me, then my sponsor, and my dad. And she even said this, my dad was singing those Catholic, responses that he remembered as a child. I think he kind of enjoyed it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. Huh. And the two friends, couple that had come, they were like, wow, when it was over. They were not anti-Catholic about that at all. That's the most amazing service I've ever been to, the Easter Vigil. Still love Easter Vigil so much. This past year, I think, was my favorite Easter Vigil ever. So, okay, so
Wonderful.
then it just kept going from there. My husband, we didn't ever talk about me being Catholic. He was okay with it. He's not a, what can I say? He's not a hard-hearted person or anything. Yeah. And, we love each other. We allow what we need to, Right.
There's a mystery of grace there. Everybody's on their own particular
absolutely.
Journey. We trust God in His timing.
Yep. So I think I mentioned I joined the choir. Recently, I've been trying to redo the library because it's got a lot of older books. Me and my sponsor, we've been going through the library. I've been starting to buy some new books, and I want to, because really, the studying part, the books, and just a shout out to Brant Petrie, he was my favorite. Had to listen to a lot of his, back then I had CDs that I'd play in the car, and just really, he's got a neat sense of humor and stuff. So, that's what I've been doing since. And I wanted to just bring up, so in my book, I mentioned that I have a son who had a serious mental illness. We were separated for over 6 years. That's in my book. And in 2018, my mother suffered major heart attacks. My dad died in 2015, just 6 weeks after I joined the church. And I was hoping that was going to be a reconciliation for us, but it wasn't. He was really close to my dad, and he took it hard, and the time wasn't right. But in 2018, my mother had some major heart attacks in February. And I think it was about the 4th day after that happened. In fact, it was my dad's birthday that I came home from the hospital. My sister had flown out from Arizona to go visit my mom. We got home, and it was like 4:00 in the afternoon. My husband was home from work early, answered his phone, and it was my son, Ryan. And he said, I want you and Mom to come up to my apartment. This is like 20 minutes from where we live. Can you come up and see me? And I was like, wow. And that's very day after my sister and I had been to the hospital, my mother, who had almost died, they put a new pump in her heart, anyways, she was going to be fine. The doctor was like, she's got an 80% chance of a full recovery. And we were like, really? Wow. So we were so excited. I get home, there's this call, Ryan wants to see me. So we went up there, and he hugged me and just said, I'm sorry, Mom. It's okay, Ryan. As a parent, you forgive your kids all the time. There was never, I didn't even care that he said he was sorry. He just wanted to see me, but he did that. And, he had a lot of psychosis with his schizophrenia, and, he was at a low point. So we went up, we spent the night with him. I went up there every day to be with him for about 2 weeks. And then he got better and started working again. He worked in the family business. And so that went on. 2018, it was February of 2018. Then he'd have some low points. He'd came and stay with us for a while sometimes instead of at his apartment. And it was August of 2019, August 3rd, and that was a Saturday. And he'd spent the night, a couple of nights with us. And in the afternoon, after Robin had gone to church, we went to visit some family or some friends. And we got home, and Ryan wasn't there. And we asked the kids that were home. No, he just left. So we didn't think too much about it. But he didn't come back that night. His car wasn't in the driveway in the morning. I remember looking out. And at that time, I was looking into the Latin Mass. So I had gone a couple of times to the Basilica in Syracuse. And so I was going there again. And I remember going in for confession. And I just mentioned to the priest about my son. He's missing. He has a mental illness. Can you pray for him? And I got home expecting that he'd be there when I got home. And he wasn't. So my husband and I drove up to his apartment. We didn't say anything the whole way there because we kind of had a feeling. And my husband went up there, and he had committed suicide. He took a sodium nitrate, something that you use to cure meat, because he was a hunter, and he had a smoker, and he made his own venison. And, that was pretty devastating. He came down and told me, and he left a note, and he did say, may God have mercy on my soul. But he had just come to a place where I can't live like this anymore. He took his meds, but there wasn't any future for him, he felt. So, you know, he's been on my heart a lot. And I want to say to parents who have lost children, I know what you're going through. And, I wish I could find a group that we could meet together, because I'm just saying I had to get back to my life. It took a month or so, to try to like smile and laugh again. Yeah. But for me, I had 9 other children, I couldn't just devote and feel like this was the end of my life because of this. And so I just want to encourage parents to don't give up. You can get your life back again.
We can keep praying, right? As Catholics, again, like on the one hand, the church recognizes, that sin is serious, but the church always calls us to pray for people, right? Because it recognizes the mystery of grace here, that God is outside of time, and he's bigger than us, bigger than our concerns, bigger than what we can see. Yeah. And so as Catholics, we pray and we fast for the souls of our loved ones, and we entrust them to God.
Yeah. We had his funeral service in the Adventist church. He wasn't going to any church anymore, but that was what we felt we needed to do. And it was a beautiful service. And I was like wishing there could be something Catholic in it, but Brian did come to he actually came to Mass with me a few times, and he enjoyed it. He even went to that Latin Mass with me once, and he said, yeah, it was good, but I have no idea what they were talking about. But we based it on 1 hour, and we didn't have any testimonies about his life or anything. We just kept it simple. And we had so many people, just really, it was the best funeral they'd ever been to. And I think part of it was keeping it concise, kind of like the Mass. That's how I felt. But
well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Because again, like you said, there are people out there who are feeling that, and we want to encourage them that their journey needs to continue. And part of that journey is to pray for the souls of
and it really awakened in me the praying for others with mental illness.
Yes.
You see people every day that you can just tell they need our prayers. Yeah.
We have about 7 minutes left, and so a couple thoughts I wanted to ask about. One is just what makes me think about your book, Seasons of My Faith. What's the significance of this notion of seasons? What
I know. When I was putting that together, I'm like, I kept thinking for a long time, I don't know what to make the title, my journey or something, but just because of the, one season to another. And I don't know when I get to the end, I mean, how many seasons will it take for me to, but now I'm here. And that's just where God's led me. I just always wanted to be open to the Holy Spirit's guidance.
Well, it came to my mind when you were sharing your story with your son, just because again, our life has seasons. We come to know Christ, and then we have a season of kind of a honeymoon time, with the Lord, and then we have seasons of suffering and doubt, just like our Lord, right? Moments where it doesn't feel like the Lord is close to us. But that's part of this journey, right? Is enduring and praying through the different seasons of our faith.
And that's what the church taught me, was the suffering part, that the suffering is what brings us closer to Christ if we let it do that. You can go one way or the other, even as a couple, It could have torn us apart, and instead it brought us closer together, and we still have a wonderful marriage. It was my husband's idea to read out of the Bible and pray every morning before he leaves for work. And I know God has sustained us all this time. Amen. So I wanted to make sure in October I did a pilgrimage to France by myself. I mean, it was a group from our church, and from a few other churches in the country. What an amazing experience. We went to a different cathedral every day, and had Mass. The sights, the people, it's such a wonderful group of people I met, other Catholics, kind, good people. It was a highlight of my year, obviously. I wished I could have taken my husband with me, but we probably couldn't have afforded it, nor would he have wanted to come. But it was still the experience that I dreamed of.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Pilgrimage is very, very powerful. Again, it's almost like pilgrimage, the spiritual discipline of going on a pilgrimage. Part of the power is that it's a reminder that, I'm still a pilgrim in this life, right? And I have to kind of continue to live that out. Obviously, I'm sure as part of that, you were visiting different sites and churches and saints. I wanted to ask you about saints. Can you?
Yeah.
You encountered those ladies praying the rosary. What's been your journey with like the rosary or the saints or Blessed Mother?
Yeah. That's something I do want to. So when I was pursuing the Catholic Church, it was this little secondhand shop, antique shop kind of, in my town, and I used to stop in there. We were actually remodeling our kitchen and bathroom at the time, so I was just going in there to look for things because I like older things. But I found this statue there. It was a concrete, heavy, probably about that tall, and I wanted to get it. I knew it was Catholic, so assuming that it was Virgin Mary, brought her home, put her in a special place, took a picture of it and took it to my rosary group the next week, and I showed it to my friends. That's not Mary, that's St. Therese. And then she kept showing up in different places. Like I'd had this rosary that
Therese
a friend gave me,
that.
and I was praying that rose with those beads for I don't know how long until I looked down and saw that the middle thing on the other side of Christ was St. Therese and other things. So that was one of the big things that drew me to France.
Yeah.
We went to her town at Lisieux. We went to her house, to the Carmelite monastery. So yeah, she's been a big part.
That's wonderful. Yeah, she strikes me as one, again, because her whole spirituality of this notion of doing little things with great love.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of a great counterpoint to this question earlier about what do I do with all these rules and things of the faith, right? What's the real right way to approach them? Well, it's the inside out. It's like with great love, yes, I'll take these opportunities to prioritize the Sabbath or try to do this beautifully and perfectly, right? From a heart of love, even little things can be opportunities to show our love to God.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Oh. Well, there's just a few minutes left here. Again, I really appreciate you sharing, again, the difficult story of your son, but the encouragement to other parents who perhaps have gone through that. And again, we'll be praying for the repose of his soul and for others who have experienced that. But with a few minutes left, for other people listening who, again, maybe coming from a Seventh-day Adventist background or a similar one, where maybe again, they may be having this experience that you had right now, the experience of never really hearing someone who has left Seventh-day Adventism or maybe looked through a different lens at the world. And so if there's someone out there, again, who's wrestling with that or considering that, what's a word of encouragement that you could give them?
Just don't be afraid to look outside the box. I had no intention of leaving the Adventist church up until that very day. I was a happy Adventist. I liked, it was a burden sometimes, some of these things, but overall, it was a very good life. Yeah. And theirs maybe as well. But if you're looking for depth to your faith, especially, and the truth, I'm sorry, it's not there. It can be a good church to be in and, family and all of that, but I was just looking for something more that I didn't even know I was.
Yeah.
And so it was just last year that I got a new book on St. Therese, and I was reading it. Boy, it was a lot. It was a lot to take in. But in that book was this quote that she had put in there from St. John of the Cross. And this is really, when I read that, I could not believe it, that this was exactly my story. I had no guide, no light, save that which burned within my heart. And yet this light did guide my way, more surely than the noonday sun, unto the place where waited one who knew me well. I always knew that Jesus was there with me.
Yeah.
Every step of the way. And I will thank him the rest of my life for never giving up on me or, giving me that hope constantly, that there's always more. Mm-hmm. There's always that connection. Yeah. I've suffered with insomnia, like my son did. That was one of the biggest parts of his, I think he was struggling with that at the end again. And sometimes I wake up, many times I wake up and I think about him and how he dealt with it. But he didn't know Jesus like I did. And the Catholic faith of offering up, even if you can call insomnia suffering, I do. And I offer it up for people all the time. Tell me who I can pray for. And I even pray sometimes, okay, I've only had 2 hours of sleep, but if it be your will, help it to be a good day. And I get up, I'm like in the afternoon, I'm like, I didn't even sleep last night. I feel fine. He really can make up for the suffering.
Yes. Oh. Well, Brenda, thank you so much for your
Thank
story and for the encouragement. Again, all the different things you shared. Again, as you said, continue the journey and to keep hope, and in a certain sense, right, to trust that deep desire that God placed in our heart for love, for fulfillment, for truth, right? Continue the journey, keep seeking, keep knocking, because He'll open up the door.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Journey Home program. I pray that Brenda's story was an inspiration to you. Remember that we are people on the journey in this life as Christians, and so we have to keep taking each right next step forward. So let's keep each other in prayer. We'll be back next week with another story. In the meantime, God bless.